Hey, and welcome again to another episode of What Saith the Crooked Nose. Today, I'm talking to an incredibly special guest. Ruth is somebody who's got her hands in so many different areas, who's written so many different books. She bridges the gap in really kind of a translational science capacity of spiritualism and modern day science and Newtonian science. And I suspect that this conversation is going to be pretty gripping and extremely interesting. And I think that you're in for quite a treat. Now, because of the depth of her knowledge, there may be times that perhaps we do a flyby right over the head. And if there's any area in which maybe we lose you, leave a comment, let us know, right? Like and subscribe to the channel. Let us know, what you liked about the conversation. Let us know what you didn't like about the conversation, or if we lost you. That way, I can, do my best to perhaps maybe guide my guests, right, with different questions in order to help expound and not lose people so easily. But all in all, I think that you are going to have a great time being a fly on the wall for this conversation. Ruth is such a charismatic person. And again, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and you'll get much more of these types of conversations. And hey, buckle in because this is going to be a great one. All righty, Ruth Miller. I am so excited to have this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on What Saith the Crooked Nose. And allow me to introduce Ruth here. She's best described as a synthesist of all things relevant to consciousness, human potential, and culture. Works as an academic institutions, individuals, or rather works with academic institutions, individuals, nonprofits, churches, and small businesses. Dr. Miller's taught dozens of classes and led countless workshops on new paradigm systems thinking and futures research, serving as director of the Cybernetic Systems program at San Jose State. She also has taught courses on world religion, science and religion, adult education, metaphysics, and the business of ministry at the Living Enrichment Institute and New West Seminary. You also have, you've authored so many books and you were just deeply fascinating. Ruth, how the heck are you?
Thank you. I am well, quite well, actually. It's been marvelous to have found a way to allow the creative process to express through me.
I love that. Is there a method that you typically employ to get into that state?
Well, it took a while to get there. It took having to shut down everything because the body was complaining. And what I began to realize was I have to live from what truly gives me joy in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot from Michael Ray's book with Rochelle Meyer's Creativity in Business, because the entrepreneurs they interviewed, basically, they chose what was effortless to them to do, what was energizing in the process, and what they enjoyed doing. And when they do that, they were effective. So I have this little thing that I say, effectiveness equals the 3 E's.
I like that a lot. Well, and that's very Taoist too, right? Where, and in Buddhist culture that they're, in the, Buddhist, philosophy, there's really no room for forceful effort.
Exactly. Whereas in our culture, we tell everyone, push, force, drive. And one of my clients says, oh, I have to watch out. My pusher driver striver is trying to push things.
Oh, that's funny. That's really funny. And so, what is there a main area of focus that really makes your heart sing? You've got your hands in so many different pots, you do so many different things, and like, is there like a stage now where before you kind of were the caterpillar and now you're just this magnificent butterfly, and you've really found, because that the imaginal cells have really allowed you to bloom into this thing?
I wouldn't say I was the full butterfly yet, but I'm working on it.
Really? Wow. Well,
however,
I don't give a lot of hope for the rest of us if you haven't quite manifest into a butterfly. But yeah.
Oh, for me, it's all one. It looks different, but if I am talking about what we are becoming. I'm talking about our consciousness. I'm talking about our technology. I'm talking about our culture. I'm talking about the ecosystem in which we are an embedded part.
Yep.
So it's all one. What are we becoming, and what choices are we making that can move us in a direction of more wholeness, more fulfillment, more effortless, energizing, and enjoyable life, right? And if that means that I need to understand the law of attraction or string theory, or the nature of mind versus body, all those things, it's all part of the same package.
So if I want to understand string theory, I tune into people like Brian Greene and have them tell me and kind of give me like the cliff notes, because I'm an end user when it comes to physics, right? I kind of apply what these brilliant people. I'm like the guy that Ian Malcolm was talking about in Jurassic Park. You stand on the shoulders of giants. And so I try to understand and appreciate what it was that it took for them to get this. I mean, even now, right? If we consider that, with CERN, Switzerland, we have these magnificent machines that are smashing particles together. And because there's just not enough data scientists, we'll be like, Eureka, look what we found 5 or 6 years ago, right? Now we actually found somebody who could actually find it in the data.
That is a part of it. And part of it too is there are fundamental principles at work. If you've got those fundamental principles, then when someone goes off wherever they're going, you're basically building on that. And I happened to grow up a few blocks from the West Stands at the University of Chicago. I passed the cyclotron every time I walked to school. Right? So that's been part of my work. My mother worked with Fermi when she was at the university. So it's kind of the world I grew up in. And it was assumed I was going into the sciences, even though my heart was headed for the spirit, right? So I got a lot of heavy science very early on. I had a heart association research grant at 16.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so Fermi, well, that's a well-known name. And then there's the idea of the Fermi paradox, which it seems that may not exactly be quite on spot. And I'm going to really break this down to a lane, and you probably know a lot more about this, but my understanding in Cliff Notes version is effectively, this idea that if there were other intelligent, networks of, races or beings out in the world, they wouldn't be able to reach us because they would have died out long before, right? Because space is just so vast. But it seems that that is based on a Newtonian paradigm, in the way in which we put fuel into a rocket and shoot fire out the end and propel ourselves right through, rather than use, maybe field propulsion or some other
field or wormholes or dimensional travel, or being conscious across space and time and being able to pick points in space and time based on one's resonant vibration.
Well, and there's so much to play with that too, because if you think of Einstein, well, his his mentor Max Planck, right? He really talked about how everything is consciousness, right? And this is something that, so this idea that consciousness is what creates our world is not new. It just seems that the paradigm is shifting enough to where it's a little bit more mainstream now. Would you agree?
Yeah, as a futurist, one of the things that we kind of work with is, it's elucidated in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. It takes about 75 years for a concept to enter into the culture, become mainstream in the culture, and then become so normal nobody talks about it anymore.
Oh, wow. So that's about the lifespan of the Overton window, huh? And how it kind of shifts over.
Funny thing about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it is really funny. Well, and then, speaking of futurists, right, there's this, famous quote from Alvin Toffler that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn.
Yep. And actually, I was part of a group. We put together this book. It was to look at future shock from 50 years back, 50 years forward, looking back at it. And it came out right before COVID hit. So we weren't able to promote it at all. But it's out there. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a beautiful commentary on all the points that Toffler made.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting, like these pioneers, right? These people who can kind of see beyond the veil, so to speak, or play with the loom of creation and really see what is being manifested.
interesting, because I wouldn't go as so far as Luma creation. So can we play with that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I was just doing a class on an alternative understanding of the Course in Miracles. And literally that's what I was doing 20 minutes ago. And one of the points that the Course in Miracles makes is that creation is eternal, but humanity keeps projecting things onto it. And that's what's changing. So the culture has ideas about what should be, could be, ought to be, has been, must be, and imposes that on an eternal creation. And the eternal creation would be capital R reality. And all of these other things would be temporary projections onto it that are changeable. And this would be, in the Hindu idea, illusion or Maya. It is changeable and we're not stuck with it. So as a futurist, my job has become, originally it was what's happening in the future. Now it is, what are we bringing forth and what are we choosing in order to have whatever it is that we intend. And what I've chosen to do is focus on helping people find a way to live in harmony with the planet, with each other, and with whatever their spiritual life is.
I love that. And so is it the idea that creation is just there and our consciousness is like a graphic user interface? And so
I like that.
And so we're kind of bringing into our awareness what it is that we want, and then that becomes our reality?
We're actually, I think of it more as a projection onto a green screen.
Okay. Ooh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, so the creation is there, and then our own ideas become what we see on that screen. And the way that indigenous people speak of it is an individual tree is the human's idea of the concept, the creative concept of tree, or coyote, or raven, or whale, right? Each one is our current understanding / projection on this eternal concept.
So with that in mind, and this idea that we project onto, right, the substrate of reality, so to speak, I have a little bit of a longer question. So if you'll bear with me a moment, going through, just the copious books that you've written, looking at the idea of restore Earth's balance, right? I play with this, this lens of, what does the Tao Te Ching have to tell me here, right? What is it that Taoist principles have to tell me here? And I see that a lot of environmentalists, they oppose, right? They oppose, industrialization. And what happens is, just like a NASCAR driver who doesn't want to crash into the wall, if he looks at the wall, if he opposes the wall, he crashes right into it, right? And so I wonder how much of the complexities of life we're creating by our opposition, instead of understanding this idea that, if you give evil nothing to oppose, it'll go away on its own. Not because it's not there, but because we can step out of its way.
You're right on. I'm totally with you on this. That which we resist persists. All of these concepts. My friends, as I was going through graduate school and working as a consultant, would say, we're demonstrating against such and such. And I go, no, I'm over here building this instead. Right?
Well, and do you think, and so kind of playing further with that idea, especially now I got buy-in from you, do you think that maybe the best way to step out of the way of evil is to change our identity? And what I mean by that is Tony Robbins has this idea that the strongest force in the human psyche is to remain consistent with our identity. And if we identify as conquerors of the world, well, yeah, okay, well, no duh, this is what we get. But if we identify ourselves as stewards and caretakers, well, sounds like we might be stepping out of the way just by who we are and how we show up.
Right on. Absolutely. And that gets back to identity, consciousness, who I think I am, what my habits of thought are, all in the context of what is actually happening at a deeper level. The Tao is flowing. I can pretend to fight it. I can pretend to do all kinds of things, and I can cause all kinds of damage in myself and to the things I'm working with, right? But the Tao is flowing. So let's move with it, right? And when we used that title, Restore Earth's Balance, what we were saying is the wise ones of indigenous cultures are aware of the balance that is, and when there is any disharmony, any tendency to move out of that balance, their job is to bring the individual, the group, the whatever is moving away from the balance back into the flow.
And do you think that, so, everything's born of the Tao, but the Tao itself is not a creator or a manufacturer. So do you think that maybe that's where like indigo children and rainbow children come from? Is this idea that there's an imbalance in the force, right? A disturbance in the force. And so to bring balance is you just create people who are, inside of them, they're just built differently. And so they're gonna start proposing different sets of ideas and different sets of identities simply because of the way their operating system works.
Yes and no. Okay. So fundamentally, we all have that same operating system.
Mhm.
What I think indigo and the crystal children are people who, for whatever reason, the context into which they were born did not prevent them from being who they truly are.
Oh, okay. Okay. So they're not as trapped in the matrix as some of the rest of us. Okay.
Bingo. And every generation has had people who were inclined to sense the balance and imbalance. They became the wise ones, the shamans, the whatever, in every culture, right? And in our culture, we wipe them out. We institutionalize them and drug them.
Yep. Absolutely. Wow. Wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a little that's so disheartening. But at the same time, it seems that there are so many people who are waking up, who are trying to raise their
Absolutely.
consciousness, who do understand that, the path to greatness is together and not alone.
Absolutely. Together in a harmonious movement toward what it is that we know in our hearts wants to be, as opposed to together to fight off that which needs to be controlled. So, one of the common themes in my teaching, it's only in a couple of my books, is the notion that about 6,000 years ago, a new form of human life or form of human culture emerged on the planet based on the values of acquire, accumulate, and control. And with those values, then we moved into the urban environment. And Lewis Mumford's book, The City in History, is a beautiful description of how this process happens. And with that environment of control, of accumulating, of reaching out and acquiring more and more and more, we find ourselves fighting nature. We find ourselves controlling people. We find ourselves requiring that they fill in niches instead of allowing the gift to become manifest and a variety of expressions to be the norm.
Wow, that's poetic. I like that. And so another question for you is that this idea from the Kabbalion that the all is mind and the universe is mental, and that with the idea that we are projecting our image of the world, our consciousness onto the substrate. Do you think that ideas of Mammon and Baal that have kind of run our history, do you think that these are entities that influence us, or do you think that they're a consciousness maybe that's created because of our behavior? And so because so much consciousness is being placed in a general focus, it's just like a spark of a star and gives birth to a new consciousness almost?
Oh, you're marvelous. So some people would call what you're saying thought forms. They are the form that emerges out of the intense thought and the intense thought of many, many people, but they dissolve as soon as the thought changes. The image that I have is there's this marvelous Disney animation of Merlin encountering the witch of one of the forest experiences during Arthur's growing up. And the two of them start fighting, and they take on these different thought forms, more and more intense, more and more intense, until one of them wakes up and it's just this old man and this old woman in the cottage.
That's so awesome. And so, speaking of, Arthurian legends, is there any particular, legend or theories in our history that really resound more true for you than maybe any others?
Actually, yes. There's truth in all of them. They're all a kernel of this is what's possible.
Mm,
This is what a way to understand what we can experience. But the origin myth, the myth story unfolding in Taoism is very, very agreeable to me. But it was also expressed in the Sumerian origin story. And so my version of the Sumerian origin story is if beingness has the quality that we give to the sun, right? That it's this energy that is constant in motion and sending out flares and coming back in and sending out flares, and it's just being, and this marvelous beingness, right? That is aliveness. And at some point, and it's intelligent, it's aware, right? And at some point, it sends out this flare and becomes aware there's there and here.
mm,
And that becomes the birth of Tiamat. And the flare between them becomes the basis for what the Tao calls the 10,000 things.
mm,
And so now there is material and there is separation. Matter is a function of separation in that model. So all that exists in form exists out of the beingness contemplating itself as potential form and then continuing to explore that.
which is effectively the observer effect, right? Which collapses the wave of possibility into particle reality.
Right, which gets us to Amit Goswami's self-aware universe, right? And there
Mm,
was a marvelous Brit, a magistrate in India, in the Punjab, who came back and he was writing, and his notion of the emergence of all that is was the self-contemplation of the intelligence that is the universe.
wait, say that one more time.
That all beingness comes from the self-contemplation of the intelligence that is that which we call the universe.
Okay. And so if it's the all, and then the all starts contemplating itself and says, hey, is there more? It's immediately created a separation. Because if the all is all and it says, is there more? Well, now it's distant from being the all.
Right. And then there is a creative process of the question of more then generates more. And so he defines what most of Western culture calls God as the creative process. And one of his books was The Creative Process in the Individual.
Well, and creation is necessary, female energy is necessary for that active creation, but to take it forth and add +1, +1, +1, right? That's that male energy, yeah?
Right. So the continuing extension of possibility. And that's where we keep getting back to the core of truth, right? The accumulating of more is a misrepresentation of the continuing extension into emptiness of possibility becoming more.
That's fascinating. So this is like the type of church I'd like to go to, right? Somebody who stands up and shares these ideas and allows me to expand my mind instead of and it reminds me of that famous Richard Feynman quote that, I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned.
Right with you all the way. And so I am now speaking 5 Sundays a month in 5 different churches.
That's so awesome. Yeah, I saw that you were a minister, and what a beautiful thing. And can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, was it a spiritual path that drew you to that? Did you just kind of happen into it? Was it the imaginal cells and just the brilliant, the brilliant schematics that you just, as you found your path, you just kind of became that sort of butterfly?
You're very sweet. So I went through a physical challenge. I had like a 6-month prognosis and no medical assistance could help. I was aware because of how I had grown up that there were non-medical approaches to healing. So I began doing a lot of research. And one of those required that I learn to go inside and discover something I called the voice. It was a presence that guided, and it guided me into various places and various days. And I ended up in the lobbies, never in the church services, of several unity and religious science churches, and picking up pamphlets and reading this and reading that. And there were parallels between what I was finding elsewhere and what they were saying. I also happened to have been one of the first people to see one of the early pre-print drafts of what became the Course in Miracles, because I was working with Willis Harmon and Dwayne Elgin and Oliver Markley when it came out. And so I got to play with those ideas very early on. And all of that then led me to develop a process for my own healing. And I did heal, obviously, several decades later. And I did find this way of allowing creativity to happen through me. And I began to offer that. People were going, "What you got? I want some," right? And I couldn't do that in the context of being a futurist, a college professor, a business consultant, a nonprofit, advisor, etc. And there was only one place to do that, and that was in the context of those places that I'd been sent to pick up that information. And I didn't know that, but I woke up one point when I was doing a lot of community development work in the inner city, and I went, "Oh my goodness, I have to do this at the level of consciousness and spirit in that world. I can't do it in the business and academic world anymore." And I didn't quite know what to do. So I began looking around at what my alternatives were, and nothing was working and nothing was working. And then I'm going to tell a story. I had a dream.
Nice.
I had a dream. And in this dream, I was in an environment, some kind of environment with lots of people. And this woman came to me, and she was tall and slender, and she had red hair, and she was wearing a white dress with purple and blue flowers on it. And she walked up to me with this big glow on her face and said, "Welcome to the body of Christ." Now, yeah, I did the same thing you just did.
Yeah. I mean, the profundity, right? How does that
I don't know
profundity not
about
hit you in the
this.
face like a 2x4, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt a connection with the being I thought of as Jesus, but the body of Christ was a very specific thing, and I wasn't sure I belonged there. So in the New Testament, the body of Christ is the church, is the doctrinal Orthodox, whether it's Eastern or Western church. And I still wasn't sure I belonged there, because I was aware of a lot of other things. And my healing process had been kind of not exactly within the documentation of the church. So that was interesting. And as I was following what the voice was saying that day about guidance, it was get up and get dressed and go to such and such a place. And it was a Sunday morning. And I'm going, I've known about this place for 8 years now, and I've always been guided by you never to go there, but today you want me to go there. And it was yes. Oh, literally for 8 years, people had said, "Oh, you'll love it over there. You'll love it if you go over there." And every time I'd go inside, it was go, "No." Okay. But today I was supposed to go there. And it was a growing church environment that was meeting in a movie theater, but that day they were meeting in a tent in the parking lot because the movie was being refurbished. And so I'm wandering into this tent in this parking lot in a suburb, and I'm working in the inner city. I'm out in the suburbs. This is weird. And I find a little corner in the back, and it's nice music. It's really good music, and I'm enjoying the music. And then someone gets up and says, "Well, normally the minister would be here, but she's been detained, and so we have a guest speaker." And did this introduction, and the person who got up was a tall, slender woman with short red hair and a white dress with purple and blue flowers on it.
Wow. I just got the chills from that. Holy cow. Interesting.
And it turns out she was the head of their ministry training program.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I connected with her and she connected me with the other people involved. And it turned out that in my seeking over the years, I had completed the courses that they considered were the first 2 years of their training program. So I went into the 3rd year of their training program. 10 days later.
Wow.
Yeah, I was required to write an essay for every course in the first 2 years. And that was marvelous, that experience. So then I was ordained, and in what is called the New Thought tradition, I am in general, I'm not any particular denomination in that tradition, which includes unity, divine science, spiritual science, homes of truth, sanctuaries of truth, and what was called religious science, but is now called Centers for Spiritual Living. And all of those folks are within the umbrella of New Thought. And a lot of my writing is explaining those ideas in modern terms, both scientific and cultural.
So with your expertise in scientific language and knowledge, how would you present the idea of spirituality to help somebody who works, they're a PI in a lab, they barely leave, they're just looking to get their next funding, the only people that they're around are their maybe their data coordinators and their study coordinators, and outside of that they really have no existence other than keeping their head down, standing in their lab, and just meeting their next deadline.
That wouldn't happen to be autobiographical, would it?
No, but I've worked with those people. I worked at the University
I
of
bet
Utah.
you have.
Yeah, I worked at the
I
University
read your
of
resume
Utah.
too.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And so, I have been that person that has had my, nose to the grindstone, so to speak, but not necessarily in a science capacity. But yeah, I'm curious, like it's somebody who is that, that focused on just I got to make this work, and there's only this Newtonian paradigm that's going to allow it. How do you reach in and share a little bit of the magic of whether it be through Taoism and flow or just spirituality in general? Like what's kind of that bridge, right, from you, because you have one foot in one world and one foot in another, and magnificently.
Oh, well, thank you. I do experience my life as bridging a lot. And yes, often that particular bridge of the materialist Newtonian scientist who is convinced that the only thing that exists is material, that all consciousness is a function of the electrochemical activity of the brain, and that there's nothing, nothing except what I'm doing now that has any importance, right?
Yeah.
And then the people out here are going, that's ridiculous. Right?
Yeah.
Right. And normally, if someone's got their nose to the grindstone, I don't exist except as part of the grindstone, right? So we don't get to have that conversation. But as soon as there is any question at all, and sometimes there is, and usually it's because they've been hit on the head with a 2x4, which is my way of saying the universe taps us on the shoulder and says, hey, there's another way. The universe shakes us up and says, hey, there's another way. And it hits us harder and harder until we're flat on our back, which effectively is what had happened to me. I was on my back for like 6 months, right? So, if I'm in there before they get flat on their back, then there's a conversation we can have that is something like, it's always going to be starting wherever they are, whatever questions they're asking. But it's like, why did this happen to me? Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good starting point. Why would something like this happen to me? And I would go, well, first of all, what do you think? And they begin to go, well, I didn't make this happen. How come this is happening, right? Well, if you didn't make it happen, then what out there could have brought you to this place? And what is the benefit of being in this place? Oh, you mean there's something working in my life for my benefit beyond, And then that begins to be an opening. The realization, as with someone in the 12 steps, that there is a higher power working here. Now, that higher power can be an aspect of my own consciousness, my own higher self, which is fine. I'm cool with that, right? That there's an aspect of me that operates in 5D, right? And then the rest of me operates in 3D. I'm cool with that. If that opens up where we're going, that's beautiful. But then if I can see that that aspect that's operating in 5D is part of something that's even more wonderful, that's operating, you know, in multiple universes, whoa, then yeah. But I have to, you know, I can go through the life sciences or the physical sciences or the emotions, and, you know, find the thread that gets us to, there's something larger than this body working here. Now, in my radio show, Noetic Moments, what we talk about is the normal structure that the brain is wired and fired on, and the fact that there is this electromagnetic and otherwise field that actually seems to be running things. And so we talk about mind as the field and brain as the receiver transmitter for the body.
I like that. And, you know, when it comes to electromagnetism, you know, I've played a lot with looking at, you know, planetary bodies and the difference between, well, electricity and magnetism. And, you know, take Jupiter, for instance, right? This, you know, cacophony of, you know, electrical storms, but they don't breach the limits of Jupiter's atmosphere.
Right.
And yet,
it's a sphere. Yeah.
Exactly. And yet the magnetosphere stretches all the way to Earth's orbit.
Isn't that beautiful?
That
right. And so if I got someone in physics and they're going, it's all material, it's all measurable, we understand it all, I say, so please explain gravity to me. Please explain electricity to me. We don't know it all. There is something going on here we don't have answers for. So maybe there's other ways to approach the answer. And there's this marvelous guy, Donald Hoffman, who is a neurologist, and he is saying maybe there's a way we can approach this impossible question of how the brain generates thoughts, right, from another angle. And he's actually using some of the equations from quantum mechanics to help explain that. And I love his work.
That's awesome. And well, and the idea of, you know, the quantum realm, you know, could easily be construed as the spiritual realm, right?
A lot of people are doing that, and it's a nice metaphor, kind of like the 100th monkey is a nice metaphor.
Yep. Well, and, you know, whether, you know, I mean, nobody knows the truth of the capital T, and whether, you know, whether it is the truth or not, I think it's necessary to find, you know, models of the world that serve us, right? Maps. As long as we don't get lost in the fact, you know, the idea that, because the map is not the territory, of course, but if it helps us interact with the territory and helps us find our grounding, so then we can kind of push forward and then make something of our lives and help others and find that path to, well, to love and share that magnetic power of love, right? To create and expand our own magnetosphere. And
absolutely. I'm with you on that. And, you know, as you said, as long as we remember that the model is a map, not the object, as the Tao that can be named is not the Tao, right?
Yeah, because naming is the, you know, origin of all particular things, and the Tao is not a particular thing.
Exactly. In that framework, that works perfectly.
Yeah. Well, and you're probably familiar with David Hawkins' work, right? Like Power versus
Love it.
Force.
I was just talking about it about an hour ago.
And I've come to understand that, you know, the levels of consciousness are logarithmic in scale. And you know, is that in your mind how somebody like, say, you know, Mahatma Gandhi, right, some dude in a loincloth, can assemble a peaceful, you know, resistance to stop, right? I guess not even necessarily a resistance, but just like an identity, a mass cultural identity that refuses to think anything different, and it disarms, right, a million-man, right, British Army.
Satyagraha. I need to let you know, my grandmother was one of Gandhi's spokespersons.
Wow, look at you. Wow, you got Fermi, you got like Gandhi, you got all sorts of connections.
I know, it's a beautiful, beautiful world I grew up in. And so when Mohandas K. Gandhi was trying to find how to undo what he was experiencing from the moment he got thrown off the train in Africa, right?
Yep.
He realized very quickly that he could not resist, as you so rightly named earlier, right? You cannot resist. You have to be operating in a way that the person automatically flows with you, right? And so what he was embodying and training people to embody was a state of consciousness in which the people that were engaged, there was no room for any other state of consciousness. All right.
Interesting.
So to go back to David Hawkins' stuff, we're talking about it, people wanted to come at them at solar plexus to solar plexus, which is about resistance, and that is the level of consciousness, resistance, honor, self-righteousness, all that good stuff. Yeah.
Machismo and yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I'm of the opinion that, for example, the founders of the US were there and just a little bit at a higher level into the heart chakra, into that caring about each other and honoring each other. So they were able to create a nation based on those values, which we are not in anymore, but that's what they were aiming for, right? Well, Gandhi saw that and built on that. He built on that to higher and higher heart level. And then he started realizing there needs to be this wisdom expressed through it. So we get the throat chakra, which is part of Hawkins' model also. And then he made it a point to get to the highest state of consciousness he could be in and stay there as much as possible, so that he would literally be drawing people up to higher states of consciousness. And so satyagraha is a state of consciousness in which everyone is drawn into that way of being, and there is no possibility of any other response.
Almost a singularity.
Almost. If you think of a field of consciousness as a singularity, I'm willing to go there. Yeah. Now, someone in the group I was just with was bringing up the spiral dynamic memes. And that's related to this as well. So if people are interested, if you can take power versus force, eye of the eye material, take spiral dynamics material, and then weave that into chakras and states of consciousness that are ways of being in the world, then I think you got something useful.
That's so fascinating. Well, and then, there's more than just, you who are doing such amazing work, like Dr. James Gates, I want to say out of Maryland. He was on a panel discussion, I don't know, sometime, 5, 6, 7 years ago with Neil deGrasse Tyson as the host. And he was describing in detail how fractal patterns have hidden within them computer code. And that computer code is very, very similar to what we would see on a web browser.
Absolutely.
For search, like a search engine. Sorry.
A search engine, right. Yeah. The fractal is like a search engine. Yeah. The code is it's a mathematical equation that generates the fractal. The algorithm is a mathematical equation, effectively. It's a logical statement. And yeah, it's very similar.
Well, and that makes so much sense when you couple the idea of manifesting with people who, they feel like the world happens to them, right? Life happens to them. They say, oh, why does this always happen? And the universe says, oh, here's why. Oh, here's also why. Oh, here's also why. And here's a big pie in your face to show you why, right? But when people change that and they say, hey, how can this be for my benefit? In the same way that you mentioned about, the scientists, right? What could how could this have been a benefit for you to guide you into a place where maybe the path of least resistance? If you needed to move in order to be who you needed to become, well, if your house burns down, it seems catastrophic,
Right.
catastrophic. And yet it may be exactly what displaced you and put you on the path to get exactly where you needed to go.
Precisely. And the house burning down is only the last step. There have been lots of opportunities before.
There's been a rumble strip. You've kind of pulled off the side of the road.
Right.
You had a cop flash his lights behind you. Yep.
All kinds of things like that.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's another way to look at all of that too. And that is that, not only is this a benefit for me, it's a benefit for the whole. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. That's one of the points that Thomas Troward, I mentioned him earlier, but also Wallace Wattles in The Science of Getting Rich. Yep. They both say the universe is designed for the fulfillment of the individual in the context of the fulfillment of the whole.
Which makes sense that consciousness would want to be able to serve itself at some level, right? Some supreme consciousness that would want its back, right? In the same way that if I'm playing a board game, I may not be my avatar, but I still want my avatar to win. I still want my avatar to have benefit, and I want it to have fun, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. I want it to accomplish what it is there to accomplish, which in Buddhist language is my dharma. So I take refuge in my dharma.
And so coming back, speaking of Buddhism again, and the idea of, say, reincarnation, the idea of indigo children, crystal children, are these people who have served their dharma and gotten good karma and reincarnated into higher beings, and in the idea of, if you've got good karma, maybe you'll be reincarnated as a monk in this, and having somebody who creates mass movements to help raise the levels of consciousness could, in a matter of speaking, be a monk to society, even if they're not necessarily in a monastery.
Yes, anyone can be a monk to society. No question about that. Karma is an interesting concept. It's kind of like the Tao in the sense that it isn't really languageable, but each of us is constantly acting, and the acting is rippling out and will ripple back to us. So whatever thought, word, action, feeling that we are generating, we will experience the consequences of. Can't not, okay? As we complete a life, we may have unfinished things that we choose to come back and finish. I came to an awareness way back when I was in that healing process that virtually everyone that's on the planet today chose to be here to get us through this transition that we are going through. And in the book of Revelation, if we want to go back to the biblical, what the transition is the ending of the apparent separation between heaven and earth and the merging of one heaven and one earth, a new heaven and a new earth. In the words of a Mayan shaman, for lack of a better word, it is the ending of the world of the unconscious accumulation and control, and the emergence of a world of conscious cooperation and interconnectedness. So we were operating in the material world trying to control, and now we are operating in the realm of consciousness and spirituality.
Well, and if you think of, unconscious control, you see it all over, with people who are like this all day long. And, what I find interesting is that, I've been playing with this idea of like these gateway words, these words that written one way have, an inherent meaning, but then if you flip it around or you change a letter and you take a letter from one space, like, earth and heart.
I knew that's the one you're going to pick.
Yeah. Well, it just depends on where you put the H, right? Or, right. In this case, right, lived and devil. Well, if you think of the idea of the tree of life, right? Where you experience life, right? Somebody who I enjoy, following is Sadhguru, and he talks about how life is about experience. Because if life isn't about experience, in my words, not his, we become like the child who folds their arms and goes, "No, I don't like it," and then there's the frustrated parent, like, "How do you know? You haven't even tried it." Because I just know, right?
Yeah.
We've made up our mind. And so when we're looking at it and, hey, this just doesn't make sense, well, we're not living. And if we're not living, well, then we're stagnating. And what's attracted to stagnation? Well, parasites, mosquitoes, diseases, and which is evil, the devil, right? And so if you're eating on just knowledge, and you're only eating on knowledge, and you're not applying that knowledge through some sort of lived experience, well, then you can never experience the kind of the holy joy, the love that is there inherently, because you just wither and wither and wither and wither more and invite more entropy into your life.
Beautiful, beautifully put. And one of my little books is called Spiritual Success, and it's based on a talk I give that is the 4 S's in spiritual success. And the first one is to study, to live on the knowledge, to be opened to or reminded of the highest one can be aware of in the moment, and then silence, to take that in, and then sharing, either in writing or with someone else, and then service, acting on it and with it and through it. Study, silence, sharing, and service every day to remind us who we truly are and to become who we can be. And then there was another thing that you said that I think is marvelous, and I love Sadhguru too. I think he's just amazing. And we're not just here to experience, we're here to express. We're here to be that creative process, to express what is ours to be in the world. This is part of our Dharma, right? So we are opening to experience and allowing the expression. We are sharing and serving in that process.
Holy cow. Wow, that's beautiful. I really like that a lot. Yeah, and I find there's so much more poetry and dance to language when since I've become more spiritual, right? I don't need things to be quite as concrete. I don't necessarily need to have rules for the sake of rules. In fact, I find that the spirit rebels against rules. But regardless of that, even if others are playing with rules and are bound by rules, there's still such a great benefit to interacting with them. And what I mean by that is once upon a time, right, I had my dark night of the soul, and I live here in Utah. And, as most people know about Utah, right, we've got a strong, LDS, footprint here. And, one day, so I've been following a lot of Jordan Peterson as well. And I started listening to his biblical series on Genesis, and it immediately blew my mind. Instead of looking at these as Babylonian barbarians who didn't know anything, I immediately said, oh my God, this makes so much sense that they would be oral traditions, and they're just now able to start assembling them. And then the Bible is actually a library, not a book. And, with that idea, I started playing with, okay, well, now that I see the honor and value in this, is there room for God in my life? And it wasn't long after that I had a vision pumped in my head of a podium. It was so vibrant, and I just knew that meant that I was supposed to be speaking from behind the podium and addressing people. And I knew I don't know, I didn't have a voice, like there wasn't an audible voice. I just knew. And I knew that it was supposed to be a Mormon church. I'm like, Johnny, how in the hell are you, like, you're agnostic at best. You're likely some level of atheist. You don't really know what you believe in when it comes to God. How are you going to go up there and address? Well, then I found out that, later on, the how is none of my business. And so I really just started talking to my friends and I said, look, hey, you might find me crazy, but I had this vision, and I'm trying to figure out, how can I bring this vision to life? And when my friends were like, well, you do know that every first Sunday of every month is called the fast and testimonial meeting, where anybody who shows up can go up and speak. And I was like, anybody, huh? And they started chuckling because they've seen me on some pretty interesting, rants. And but I started interacting with them, and another piece of advice that, Dr. Peterson gave me was this idea that one of the best things we can do is to create our highest ideal of goodness and then become it, make ourselves worthy of it by becoming it. So when I was, going to this church, right, there's so many people who follow these rules, and then another one of these gateway words, dogma, backwards is am God. Interesting. And so here they are following their dogma, and I didn't realize I was flipping it backwards to am God, because whenever everyone, inevitably every single service, there would be 3, 4, 5 people that would say some approximation of the same thing, which is, brothers and sisters, I know, that Joseph Smith is the one true prophet of God, and I know in my heart that the Book of Mormon is the one true word of God, and I know in my heart that this is true, and this is my personal testimony, and somebody else said basically the same thing. But instead of judging them for, oh, look at how silly these people are, which is what I totally would have done, maybe even a year before this, I immediately lionized them and said, well, hey, I'm playing with what is my highest ideal of goodness. Well, that's probably what they're doing too, right? And this idea that just because they don't have the ability to articulate an idea well, it doesn't mean that they don't have an idea to articulate. So I immediately started saying, well, if that's their highest ideal of goodness, what's mine? Well, I had an answer to that. And I started constructing. And so every time that they do that, I would then reinforce this idea. And, soon enough, so this idea was Gandalf, but not Gandalf in the, fighting demons and the Witch King, which is cool and all, don't get me wrong. But the reason why Gandalf was the link that helped save the world is because he realized what everyone else took for granted, that the hobbits who seemed like they had nothing left to give were the purest source of love. And that love and that camaraderie is literally what protected Frodo and Sam from the evil of the ring. And so here's this wizard with all these wizardly ways who just loves to be around people who love community and love to share and love to give back. And so that's what I reinforced. And it was about a year, not even a year later. It was about, maybe it was 11 months later that I met the master healer who taught me how to heal. And it's just like, what? What? Well, and then Sadhguru helped with that too, because that guy I thought he was so bizarre, because I come from such a Newtonian space. It's like, okay, dude, you're a healer, okay, and then and he really leaned in too, because he was he's talking about interdimensional demons and curses and hexes. It's like, boy, I don't know what to think about this, but when I was in that space of, I don't know what to think about this, I didn't say, hey, I think this. So since I gave myself an opening in my right ear, I heard an audible voice. This has only happened a couple of times in my life, an audible voice. And it was Sadhguru's voice that said, life is about experience.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. That is so cool. Yep. And I'm delighted that you like the Gandalf. I like too. And I love it that you put it that way. That was just marvelous, that he saw the importance and the value of being that kind of a being in the world. Yes. And that became a huge part of what you're about. This is beautiful to see. And so my sense of what is happening in the world today is that which I'm calling empire culture is dying, and we're watching it fall apart around us. And a new kind of culture is emerging, and this new kind of culture is based on the kinds of values you're talking about. And it's based on realization that we are, an interconnected part of this incredible thing we call Earth, this, biosphere, and that every physical thing we own, every piece of particle matter that we touch is Earth, made available to us for us. And it's in the form that our consciousness, our beingness has called forth for our fulfillment, our Dharma, in the Tao of all that is.
Man, that's so poetic. I love that. And so, you have all sorts of, activities and events that you put on. If people want to be able to reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
I do have a website, RuthLMillerPhD.com. And I try to keep it up to date. So all my speaking engagements and classes and things are on there. I have a sharings page on there so they can read what I've been thinking about for years now. And then there's a page of the books that I've written. They can take a look at the books and find them, either order them there or order them on Amazon. I do have an Amazon page, and almost everything I've ever written is on Amazon, 4 different publishers. And then yeah, that's probably the best thing. They can reach me. Then links to the radio show are there. Links to Gaia Living Systems Institute are there. Links to the different churches that I'm working with are there. And links to things like this. If I get a link from you, I'll put it on my website.
Yeah, sure. I totally will. And so, yeah, so the best place is your website, which is kind of the hub to all the other things that you're doing. Okay.
Right on.
That's awesome.
Ruth L. Miller, PhD.com.
All right. I love Ruth. This has been such an enlightening conversation. I've truly enjoyed this. You are such a vibrant being. Do you maybe have any final words of wisdom for people who know that the spiritual life is for them, but maybe they haven't quite found what they feel is their divine purpose, or they feel that there's something better?
There's always something better.
Fair, but maybe it's not. So let me refrain. So instead of something better, like, is this all? Is this
Right.
all?
No, the joy, whatever calls us into the experience of joy, is calling us into more of who we can be and more of what the world already is.
In some manner of speaking, in an unrealized state, at least here, and it's there just waiting to be realized.
Exactly. It already exists. We have this projection onto what is of what we have believed in the past. We're dissolving that, and we're beginning to experience more fully. And a path to dissolving that is to choose the joy, choose the joy, choose the joy. And that can be immediate pleasure. It can be a chocolate fudge sundae.
You gotta love
But
that.
more often than not, it's connecting with people of like minds. It's picking up the book that's leaping off the shelf. It's, allowing that inner guidance to say, hey, show up with the woman in the white dress with the blue and purple flowers.
Yeah, that's powerful. And then with that too, when the student is ready, the master will appear. Yeah.
Does always. And in fact, is usually right there. We just didn't wake up to it.
The reticular activating system was like,
Yep.
We don't need that. Yeah. Okay. Ruth, you are marvelous. I just want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for having, such a vibrant spirit, for all the work that you do. And I really appreciate you speaking here with us here at the Crooked Nose. And yeah, I'd like to bid you adieu, and I can't wait to tune in to see, what else it is that you manifest in your life.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you so much for seeing me and sharing yourself with me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Bye.
Bye all.